I can read minds, but that doesn't mean I should. The ability has plagued me since birth. It's impossible to truly love anyone when you know their worst ideas and feelings. That's why few of us love ourselves. Horror lies in our unseen minds. Be honest. You know that to be so. Intrusive thoughts aren't indicative of our true selves. But I'm talking about the thoughts we do control. We all have dire dreams and sickening secrets. Things we only tell ourselves. And I'm talking about the minds of good people. This story isn't even about that. I could tell you plenty of terrible things that I've seen in good minds. No. This is the story of a train journey home. I'd much rather be married to Jason, one passenger lamented. I should accidentally send him a picture of... Oh, this is too easy. This girl believes anything I say. A man thought about his girlfriend. I wonder what Grandma has left for me in her will, one teenager wondered. I wish she'd hurry up and... The thoughts of everyday people. Nothing extraordinarily dreadful. I've heard worse. Yet, I've never heard anything quite as sinister as the thoughts of the man a few rows in front of me. Fresh soil and 11 roses for the garden, he thought. One for each of them. One for each of their hearts. Or succulents, perhaps. Yes. Succulent, joyous hearts. My garden shall be. His internal monologue abruptly ceased. All sound on the train ceased, in fact, other than the gardener's sluggish breathing. Slow, paced inhales and exhales. The stranger adjusted himself in his seat, and the framework of the chair creaked, as if it were under unbearable strain. I felt blood pool in my mouth, and I realized my teeth had clamped down onto my tongue. Adrenaline had blinded me to the agony. And then came something more awful than the silence. Hello, the gardener thought. Robin is such a lovely name. My throat seized, and fear paralyzed me. The man knew my name, and that meant two things. He knew I was reading his mind, and he was reading mine too. Don't be afraid, the man thought. You have such a pure heart, Robin. A real delicacy. Ticket, please. I swiveled to face the inspector in the aisle, and the sound of the carriage returned. I caught a glimpse of myself in the window. I was whiter than flour. Are you okay, love? The inspector asked. I cleared my throat. Yes, here. He inspected my ticket, nodded, and handed it back. Yeah, these late night trains are brutal, aren't they? You look a little rough, love. Might be worth getting an early night tonight. I'd love to get an early night with you, the inspector thought. You're so hot. I feigned a smile, ignoring his thoughts, and watched the inspector walk away. That was when I realized the gardener had disappeared. My body was quaking, and my jumbled thoughts were finally starting to come together. What was his name? I wondered. Often, I can read more than a person's thoughts. I can read an entire mind. But I'd never come across a slate as blank as this nameless man. He was a void. Jerry was a rude ticket inspector, wasn't he? The gardener suddenly asked in my mind. So awful to know what lies in the hearts of humans, isn't it? Chilled to the core, I spun around, but I couldn't see the stranger. And his heart would taste like ash, the gardener continued. Have you ever tried one, Robin? Who are you? I fearfully thought. Ah, there you are, my rose, the gardener whispered in my head. Have you ever eaten a heart? It's the greatest way to read a person. Next stop, Ansdale and Fairhaven, the train tannoy announced. Driven by crippling fright, I sprang to my feet and marched to the entryway by the double doors. I'd always believed myself to be the only person with this ability, and stumbling across someone with the same power might have been a blessing, if it hadn't been the gardener. Everything about that man was wrong. Robin, the gardener whispered. Take a look. His mind was a dense book, but I knew exactly where to look. The train slowly approached the station, and I cautiously twisted my head to the door at the end of the aisle. I knew I'd see something ghastly, something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Through the window of the aisle door, I could see only the gardener and Jerry. His flailing body was being pressed to the ceiling by the gardener's abnormally large hands. I felt his unwavering fear. Not the garden, the inspector pleaded. Please, not the garden. You're not fit for the garden, Jerry, the malicious stranger thought. I have another plot of land for you. Jerry screamed in his mind. No. What is that? What is that? No. Please, the garden. I want to go. With a resounding squelching noise, Jerry finally stilled his seizing, and the gardener let his victim's corpse clunk to the floor of the empty train carriage. In the bloody palms of his hands, the murderous man victoriously cradled the inspector's heart. Nobody else in my carriage had seen or heard a thing. Only I saw the inhuman man. Only I saw his lifeless eyes and terrible smile. There was nothing in his mind, nothing to read but blackness. And then, I see you, the gardener thought. The dark joy in the farthest corner of your mind. You're glad I put that pig out of his misery. You're happy. You're content. And that will only make your heart taste sweeter, Robin. The 12th rose in my garden. The train finally rolled to a stop at Ansdale and Fairhaven. I furiously jammed the open button with my index finger, squeezing through the half-open doors onto the platform. There, I waited in fear for the gardener to join me. But he didn't. The stranger observed me from the window of his empty carriage as the train pulled away. I locked my gaze onto his glazed eyes, preferring those lifeless spheres to the lips drenched in Jerry's blood. Not yet, the gardener thought, smiling horribly. I'll wait for your heart to ripen, Robin. That was 2 months ago, and I read about the grisly discovery of the train inspector's body on a local news site. It wasn't some fever dream on the late-night train. It really happened. I've barely slept since, I lie awake at night, feeling eyes upon me, not upon my body, but my mind. I feel the gardener rooting around in there, as if I were a rose in his flower patch. Sometimes, in a fit of fright, I see the curve of that carnivorous smile in the darkened corner of my bedroom, waiting to devour my heart. But fear is a good thing. I'll stay unhappy forever. After all, when I lower my guard and finally allow myself to enjoy life again, that's when he'll come for me. The gardener likes succulent, joyous hearts.
I am 5,000 people. I was born at 11 p.m. on December the 31st, 1999. Before midnight, I was born another 4,999 times. Since that inexplicable day in 1999, I have simultaneously experienced life as 5,000 physically separate human beings. But I am only one person. I inhabit various countries, and I live 5,000 lives. I work with my other selves. It has benefited me in numerous measurable and immeasurable aspects of life. You may have questions. Do I have a singular personality? A singular sense of self? I'm not entirely certain. Perhaps I do. But I have differing hopes, dreams, and ideals as each person. Some of my selves are introverted and sweet, whilst others are extroverted and bold. This is not a case of dissociative identity disorder. It's an entirely foreign notion. Explaining it is impossible. It feels so everyday to me, like breathing. Do you really comprehend the very nature of your existence? Not the science of it. The feeling of existing. The feeling of having a mind and a soul. In the same way, I don't know how I exist. I write this post as Mark, a 24-year-old man with a wife and a baby boy. I'm one of 927 selves with children, and that number will only rise as the years continue. It's a frightening new chapter of my life, as I wonder whether my kids might inherit this gift. I have navigated this uncharted territory, but who's to say that they would? As Mark, I work at a large bank in the city, and one of my other selves lives in the area. I am a baker named Lucy, and, as Mark, I try to help Lucy as much as possible. As Lucy, I am excellent at what I do, and I have a fantastic work ethic. As Mark, I am a moral person. Mark definitely does things by the book. No, that's strange. I won't talk about myself in the third person. Sorry, this is new to me. I have never shared my secret with anyone. There is no word in any language to describe this anomaly to you. And why would there be words for something nobody else has ever experienced? Though, given this week's horrifying events, I'm no longer so sure that I live this life alone. Last Wednesday, as Lucy, I came into the bank to apply for a business loan. I wanted to open my own bakery in the city. As Mark, I agreed to handle Lucy's case. Now, I would never give myself any handouts. As Lucy, I wouldn't want to be gifted the world on a platter. I wanted to prove my worth as a skilled baker. Everything about the meeting was going to be above board. As Mark, I would treat myself, Lucy, in the same way as any other customer. I would like to apply for a business loan, I said, as Lucy. Of course, I've been reviewing your case, I said, as Mark. The projections for your business are impressive, and it's promising to see your online store's success. I think you deserve the loan. And then something new happened. I was no longer Lucy. As Mark, I unsteadily looked up from the documents on the table and found myself locking eyes with the woman sitting across the table. The woman whose mind was no longer my own. The woman whose body was no longer my own. The woman whose awful, malevolent smile was certainly not my own. "What's the matter, Mark?" she asked in a cold, inhuman whisper. Sweat dripping down my face, I stammered. I was unable to explain the sensation of being shut out of my own brain and body. Most horrifyingly, I was unable to explain the bug-eyed expression on her face, the ever-tightening smile, the robotic stiffness of her posture. "Do you think I deserve the loan, Mark?" Lucy asked, giggling eerily. I gulped. What's... I don't... No, I don't think I deserve it either, she icily interrupted. I don't think it would be natural, Mark. Do you? I shivered in fear as Lucy's head leaned listlessly to the left. Suddenly, the woman rose and toppled her chair over. Several customers turned their heads to witness the commotion. We uncomfortably watched the slightly off-kilter lady as she walked out of the bank at an alarmingly fast pace. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Before I could establish the horror of suddenly being 4,999 people, being a lesser self, Lucy had walked into the main road. The ceaseless, blurry flow of inner-city traffic pays no mind to oblivious pedestrians. The lorry driver had no opportunity to brake. Onlookers screamed as they watched Lucy crumple like a test dummy into a mound of misshapen limbs. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I remember the manager sending everybody home. Across Earth, 4,999 people mourned Lucy, the first of my selves to die. I know that I have lived 24 unnatural years, but there's nothing quite as uncanny and sickening as watching something steal your body and destroy it before your very eyes. It wasn't until Thursday morning that the ringing in my ears ceased, and some form of brain function returned. I suddenly remembered the ambulance arriving and paramedics taking Lucy's body from the scene. Did she survive? I wondered. I rushed to the inner city hospital and inquired at the front desk. Lucy was there. Against all odds, she had been saved. She was in a coma. Or is she still me? I wondered. I might have been exaggerating the horror of what happened in the bank. It could have been all manner of things. A stroke, perhaps. Maybe the accident reset me. My soul might return to her body, making me whole once more. When I strolled over to her bed, however, that notion quickly fled my brain. She was still wearing that misplaced smile on her pale, battered face. Whatever happened to Lucy, I knew she was no longer a part of me. In fact, she no longer looked human. And I don't know what possessed my body, but I think it might come from my other selves. It threatened me. It called me unnatural. It won't stop until it has taken all 5,000 lives. Whenever I look in a mirror, I see a reflection of the future. My earliest memory is one of a pool party at Harry Larson's house. I didn't see the chipper faces of my toddler pals reflected in the surface of the water. Instead, I saw Mr. Larson doing laps. He wasn't at the house that day. He was on a business trip. I started crying, and my parents took me home. I was only 3 years old, so I couldn't effectively verbalize what had upset me. But the visions didn't stop there. In every reflective surface, I saw things that were misaligned with reality. I never saw reflections of the present moment. Ricky has a vivid imagination, my mum explained to the psychiatrist. He sees things that aren't really there. But only when he looks at mirrors, Dr. Tunstall asked. All reflections, my mum replied. Is it schizophrenia? I'm hesitant to diagnose Ricky just yet, the doctor replied. It could be his way of expressing an overactive imagination. Let's keep an eye on things, shall we? I was young, but old enough to know that my claims were being dismissed. I started to hide my prophetic power. I didn't know what the doctor's big words meant, but I remember being perturbed by the tones of voice that were used in that room. So, from the age of 4 onwards, I pretended to be like any other child. Yes, Mum, of course I see myself in the mirror. Nothing and nobody else. I understand their skepticism. As an adult, I would probably accept the hallucination diagnosis. But on July the 1st, 2004, I saw Liam falling backwards in the reflection of a car's pearlescent surface. My friend who was gleefully playing football at the time. An hour later, when the car sped off the driveway, the horrifying prophecy came true. Little Liam was hit by the reversing vehicle and rushed to hospital. I finally realized what I saw in reflections. The future. I finally embraced the terrible truth that I had no psychological issues. Well, none in the sense that my mother and doctor imagined. It was the first time I'd seen the events depicted in a reflection come to life, and it wouldn't be the last. I'm 28 years old. For years, my prophecies have been mundane. Nothing as sinister as that fateful summer afternoon with my childhood friend. Of course, I wouldn't be here if I had no more stories to tell. In fairness, I always thought my ability to be terrifying in itself, an anomaly with no explanation. But 2 months ago, I saw the true face of terror. Nothing's been the same since. I work as a graphic designer in Manchester, the city of a million mirrors. Commuters litter the pavements, but different faces appear in the ground-level windows of skyscrapers. Sometimes, even in the early morning, those glassy towers reflect a blackened sky and the orange glow of streetlights. I could be seeing a reflection of the street on that same night, or a night 3 years into the future. I have no way of knowing. But 2 months ago, I saw something unsettling in the window of a particular city centre building. Something I'd never seen in a reflection before. The present. That wasn't what frightened me, however. Once the initial shock subsided, I found myself focusing on a disturbing detail in the background. Something was squatting beneath the menu sign for a restaurant. A horrid thing. Shriveled, gaunt-faced. A demented interpretation of a man. Horrified, I twisted my head to find nothing beneath the real-life sign. When I returned my gaze to the window, I was faced with a reflection of that same street in the future. Different faces, different cars. Everything was back to normal. My idea of normal. However, every morning that followed, the malevolent man revealed himself in numerous reflections, only ever for a fleeting moment, always around dusk, the hour of the gloaming. And that's how I came to name the terrible, inexplicable spectre. It wasn't the present that would come to haunt me. As always, it was the future. And the gloamer would prove himself to be not a warning, but a promise. "Drinks after work?" Holly asked. "Of course. That's got to be a statement, not a question," I said, grinning. "You're okay with Anna coming, right?" Terry asked. "Sure," Holly replied. "I don't know about you, though." At 5 p.m, my colleagues and I piled into Holly's car. And I immediately noticed something odd. Her rearview mirror reflected blackness. I cast my eyes to the wing mirror, and in it, I saw a different reflection. A scarcely lit, scenic road at twilight. I thought nothing of it, as I rarely think anything of my visions. Reflections rarely depict events that I end up witnessing. Not since Liam. "Oh, we're gonna miss the last train, Anna. How are you getting back, Ricky?" "Don't be silly," Holly scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Why do you think I stopped after one drink? I'm the designated driver. I won't drop you off at the train station. I'll take you straight home." On the drive out of the city, I found myself pressed against the passenger window, blurry-eyed, with my ears ringing from a lethal concoction of club music and Terry's tone-deaf singing. Familiar scenery rolled by. A landscape I'd seen reflected in the wing mirror earlier. Countryside illuminated by dregs of dawning light. However, when I looked at the wing mirror again, that same glass pane reflected only darkness, much like the rearview mirror. Holly groaned. "What's this?" A large red sign in the road read, "Diversion, turn right." The colours swam in my tired, inebriated vision, but they were just as familiar to me as the country road itself. I realised I'd seen the sign before. Prior to our night out, I'd seen those words reversed in the front windshield of Holly's car. I was deeply unnerved by the number of premonitions that I was seeing unfold before my very eyes. I couldn't quite put my finger on what was disturbing me, but my stomach was twisting and tightening. And as we veered down the right-hand country lane, I was certain, if only for a moment, that a burst of light filled the blackened wing mirror. It revealed a ghoulish glimpse of the present. The gloamer was crouching behind the road sign. The creature had twisted his lifeless, decomposing face in the direction of our car. yellow maggot-ridden eyes locked onto mine. Terrified by the phantom that stalked us, and unable to resolve the sense of impending doom in my chest, I murmured in a drunken panic. The reflection in the wing mirror turned to darkness. "You okay, champ?" Holly asked. "I think 2 ciders might have been too many for—" "Holly!" Anna screamed. She only took her eyes off the road for a moment, but it was all over in a matter of seconds. We were upside down, engulfed by a brutish blanket of crumpled metal. The 2-foot-deep pothole was an unmarked hazard that should have been filled by the council years ago. And that was when I recalled all of the other signs that I'd missed over the weeks since first encountering the gloamer. You see, so many things in our world are reflective. People's eyes, for instance. And I used to stare into Holly's brilliantly blue marbles every single day, lost in her gentle gaze, oblivious to the horrifying reflection of the future that I'd seen in her pupils. Broken, red-tinged glass. A figure at the end of a dark road. A premonition that finally made sense as I regained consciousness and slowly wriggled my battered body through the passenger door. Rolling onto the grass, I eyed the flattened back end of the wreckage. Terry and Anna had been pancaked. Holly's twitching body hung, still seatbelted, in the upside-down driver's seat, impaled by glass and metal. Her near-lifeless blue eyes mirrored the scene of horror that I'd seen countless times over countless weeks. A premonition that I'd overlooked. Shards of glass, blood. A figure at the end of the road. And as I lay on the tarmac, sobbing at the accident that had consumed 3 of my friends, the sound of crunching gravel drew my gaze. At the outermost reach of the headlights, I saw the gloamer, but I did not see him in a reflection. I screeched until my throat cracked, and the ghoulish abomination scurried on hands and feet into the darkness. Shortly afterwards, blackness consumed me. I woke alone in the hospital. Weeks have passed since that day, but the gloamer has stayed with me. Even in my visions of the future, I'm now certain I see that crouching figure in the distance, watching, waiting. Even drinking a glass of water fills me with the fear that those horrible yellow eyes might be staring back at me. When will this nightmare end?
I used to be morally righteous until I faced 2 paths of darkness. Have you ever heard of the trolley problem? The philosophical dilemma is one that invites thinkers to question the very nature of ethics. It presents the thinker with the idea of operating a trolley without brakes, a malfunctioning train cart. Whatever the reason, you are unable to stop it. Remove any notion that you might possibly be able to halt the runaway machine. Now, accepting that the trolley or train does not have working brakes, what do you do when faced with 2 dreadful options? Ahead of you, 5 people are tied to the train tracks. On a divergent path, however, there is only 1 person bound to the tracks. You may let the train continue on its current course, brutally obliterating 5 people, or you may choose to flick a lever, diverting the trolley onto the other tracks, killing only 1 person. It is a question of action versus inaction.
Is it truly just to choose a utilitarian approach? In other words, is it just to prioritise the greater good by killing one person rather than 5? Or is it morally just to do nothing at all, letting the trolley continue on its way, killing the 5 people? After all, that would have happened if you'd not been there at all, if there'd been no human intervention. And who is to say that 5 lives mean more than 1? It is an experiment that fascinated me long ago when I studied philosophy in 6th form. However, questions of ethics are not so enticing in reality, and everything you think you know about yourself may turn out to be a terrible lie. For years, I have had the ability to foresee which actions benefit the greatest number of people. I only know when it started, not how or why. And it is, undoubtedly, a curse. Existential insight is not something I would wish on my worst enemy, for there are no rules when it comes to morality. I know that now. I learned the terrifying lesson that there is no such thing as the greater good. Playing God comes at a price. I learnt of my perturbing power on my 18th birthday. I organised a garden gathering with my friends before we disappeared to different universities. I remember eyeballing the store-bought chocolate cake and being overcome by a horrible, twisting sensation, as if someone were wringing out my guts like a damp towel. I didn't see the future as such. Craig, the family cat, pounced onto the party table, and I smiled as the sun blazed brightly. However, when I considered swatting him away, a grey cloud rapidly formed in the sky. I asked my friends whether they'd seen the darkness in the sky, which only lasted a second, but they were distracted by the cat's amusing antics. As soon as Craig moved, the sun returned. My cat greedily gorged on the chocolate gâteau, only stopping when my mum eventually ran over and tore him away. None of my friends fancied a slice after the kitten had tucked his mitts into the sponge. Only Dad was courageous enough to eat any of the cake. My father and the cat both fell sick from food poisoning that evening. My friends and I were spared. I didn't join the dots at first, but I soon started to see signs everywhere. The coincidences were too frequent. The darkness has always come in the form of a grey cloud, a burst light bulb, or simply a heaviness in my soul. And whenever I choose the dark option, many people suffer. For instance, if I'd shooed Craig away, dismissing the grey cloud, everybody would have fallen sick from consuming the cake. The lightness, on the other hand, has always come in the form of sunshine, dazzling bulbs, or even a flutter in the pit of my body. And whenever I choose the light option, only 1 or 2 people suffer. Light options always serve the greater good. I recalled learning about the trolley problem a year before I developed this strange prophetic ability, and it seemed to be a fitting explanation. The options are both awful, to some extent, whenever scenarios are presented to me. Either I allow the trolley to continue on its course, or I tug the lever. Either way, somebody always suffers. Action or inaction, those are the options. Which one is morally right? I asked my teacher, months before it began. The man shrugged. That's the problem, Danny. Neither. I sighed. That's not very satisfying, sir. No, it's not, and that's philosophy. He chuckled. But if you really want my opinion, I believe inaction is a form of action. When people stand by and do nothing, they really do something. I frowned, and the teacher smiled. See, that wasn't satisfying, was it? He asked. And you'll never be satisfied by either option, because life isn't black or white. I didn't really understand what that meant until the horrific night of December the 5th, 2015. The night on which I vowed to ignore signs from the universe and never again divert the trolley from its natural course. I was on a trip to Edinburgh with my university coursemates. A bleak evening drive through a torrential downpour of rain. There were floods across southwest Scotland, and I didn't envy the coach driver. It was a horrid night for driving. Low visibility, unforgiving road surfaces, and a busload of annoying teenagers. There were 27 of us on that single-decker coach. I want you to remember that number. I want you to think about the number of lives that were at stake whilst I recount the following events. It might help you to understand why I did what I did. It might not. "What's wrong, Danny?" my friend Hattie asked. My body started involuntarily twitching as the overhead lights spontaneously shattered, plunging the coach into darkness. Of course, nobody else saw broken lights. It was in my mind. A sign. I tried to visualise the problem. All I knew was that the stagecoach had become a trolley hurtling towards danger. There was a decision for me to make. This was different from any crossroads I'd faced before. Something about the unrelenting weather, the excitable chatter, and the sheer acceleration of the vehicle. It felt like a hulking mass of flesh and metal. The situation made my mind whir. I was struggling to think coherently. Tuning out every sound, I rose to my feet and focused my attention on finding the light. The good option. The lesser of two evils. Staying in my seat had been a dark option. I knew that. What was the universe trying to present to me? What could I do to ensure the greatest good? And then the terrible answer revealed itself. As the driver rounded a sharp bend, the coach began to hydroplane. Rubber tyres drowned in a puddle, losing grip. Every passenger screeched as the edge of the road approached, the very edge of reality itself, given that, beyond the tarmac, there was only a steep, declining bank. A thought crossed my mind, and one of the shattered overhead lights somehow returned to life. A sign that I had found a glimmer of hope in the darkness. I felt a little closer to wholeness as the path to the greater good appeared. I lurched towards the steering wheel and wrestled it to the left, steering us directly into the drop. I don't know what sparked the idea. It seemed hellish, a death sentence. However, the light had never steered me wrong before. It always led to the least destructive outcome. So I trusted my intuition. And, to my gleeful surprise, I successfully diverted the coach into a large oak tree, just beyond the edge of the road. The barrier of bark stopped us only several feet into the sharp, near-vertical descent. The front of the bus crumpled, immediately puncturing the driver's body with the wood and contorted metal. I fell to the floor, later learning that I'd splintered my wrist and suffered heavy internal bleeding. Horror filled my body as I processed the driver's horrific death, but I tried to tell myself that if I hadn't acted, the bus would have fallen down the hill. Surely, more of us would have died. Surely. Dazed and in agonizing pain, I looked at the coach aisle. Looked up the coach aisle. The bus, which had been caught mid-fall by the mighty oak, was suspended at a downward angle. Its front rested on the battered bark of the tree, preventing a deathly descent down the humongous bank. Every passenger was wearing a seatbelt, thankfully. There were bloody faces and minor injuries, but nearly everybody made it. "No!" my lecturer wailed. Dr. Jabari Ali fell to his knees, clutching the cold, lifeless hand of his fellow professor, Dr. Gene Stone. The pane behind the driver's seat had shattered, and shards of glass had shredded Gene's body. It was clear that the two professors had some sort of romantic connection. Dr. Ali spun his head to face me. His deranged expression was exacerbated by the blanket of gashes on his face. I'd never seen the gentleman look so utterly monstrous. "You," he snarled. The man lunged towards me, and his hand seized my throat before I'd even processed what was happening. As the world faded away, I saw no light. No options were available to me. The only joy I felt, for a fleeting moment, came from a sense of freedom. Something I hadn't experienced in a long time. A lack of control. It was so relieving to not worry about which option I should choose. I was blind to the possible paths of fate. And then Ali's hands fell from my neck. I choked, glancing up to see Hattie standing over our professor with the rucksack in her hands, the weapon that she had used to bludgeon him. "This demon killed her," Ali whispered. "Why, Danny? Why? What possessed you? Why did you steer the bus off the road?" "Inaction is action," I eventually whispered. A foolish utterance. Ali's eyes widened, and Hattie thumped him with the bag a second time, hoping to prevent another assault. The grief-stricken man intercepted the petite girl who stood behind him. He clutched her wrist and pulled her forwards. Perhaps he hadn't taken the steep decline of the bus into account. That's what I tell myself. Ali was a good man, one who'd been broken by a situation that had traumatized all of us. Whatever the case, it didn't excuse what happened next. We all helplessly watched, with gaping mouths, as Hattie's body cascaded down the aisle. Her ragdoll form tumbled through the glassless opening that had once been the coach's windshield. I still have nightmares of my friend plummeting down that hill. I remember the revolting noises of her bones breaking as she collided with the rocks and rough earth. Since that night, so many years ago, I have dreamt of falling into a blackened pit. Dreamt of my own bones splintering into shards. Dreamt of those deafening crunches. And I know, though I try to convince myself otherwise, that Hattie did not die quickly. She felt the pain and terror of tumbling the entire way to the bottom. 24 people survived the crash. Dr. Jabari Ali was imprisoned for manslaughter, and I faced charges for my part in the ordeal. My lawyer clarified that I was trying to save people, and I was freed. However, the not guilty verdict doesn't absolve me of my guilt. After all, who was I to choose the survivors of that crash? Who was I to say, with any certainty, that a greater number of people would have died if I'd left the steering wheel untouched? I don't know what the signs mean. Not really. If I'd done nothing, perhaps I wouldn't have transformed Jabari into a petrifying killer. Perhaps we all would have died, but would that have been my fault? I don't know. The price of control is too high, so I no longer trust the light or the dark. I am not God.
My hearing aid picks up horrible sounds nobody else notices. Ben? I bawled and blubbered. I could hear the doctor's voice. Following a motorcycle accident in early 2022, I lost my hearing and spent a tumultuous year in silence. I know many unfortunate people endure lifelong deafness, but my 18th year was the hardest of my life. For various reasons that aren't worth discussing, I had to wait a long time to receive a cochlear implant. The 2-week post-surgery wait for my device's activation was possibly the most arduous part of the entire ordeal. I just wanted the doctor to turn on the silly thing. Even as I sat in the hospital on the big day, I didn't believe it would actually work. I was ecstatic to be proven wrong. "Yes," I whispered to the doctor. "I can hear you." My parents embraced me, and we erupted into a chorus of contented sobbing. My older sister, Beth, looked up from her phone for a brief moment to acknowledge my existence. "Does this mean I can't insult this spotty loser to his face anymore?" she asked, grinning at me. "Oh, Beth," my mum huffed. "Sorry about that, Dr. Stewart." The old man chuckled. "No need to worry, Mrs. Hart. This is an exciting time for all of you. Now, Ben, it's important that we monitor your progress, okay? If you experience any issues with the implant, contact me." I nodded, smiling. I think I'd forgotten that I could actually speak again. Well, obviously, I never lost the ability to speak, but I had been self-conscious about the way my voice might sound. "Thanks, Dr. Stewart," I croaked with tears in my eyes. I'm so excited to listen to Radiohead again. "Lord, give me strength," Beth muttered. As my family and I were gleefully gliding down the long corridors of the hospital, lost in conversation, I disregarded numerous red flags. Overwhelmed by the hospital's cacophony of sound, I didn't pay attention to the noises that only I could hear. In hindsight, I realise I'd been overlooking unusual things from the second my implant had been activated. "Huh?" I asked my sister. "I didn't say anything, weirdo." "Mum, Ben's ears are broken again," Beth said. I snorted at her sassy quip, though my mum didn't seem to find it quite as funny. Still, I frowned, as I was certain I heard a voice say, "In the doorway." I shook it off. I mistook a voice on the radio for my sister, I thought. When we arrived home, there was a welcome party of friends from my sixth form, and relatives I hadn't seen in a long time. It was a jubilant occasion. My first ordinary evening in a year. The last ordinary evening of my life. It was on that first night, as I lay in bed, that some unholy breeze seeped beneath my duvet, biting my flesh with frozen fangs. Something was in the room with me. I could feel it, or rather, I could hear it. Everyday noises sounded, but they were entirely out of place. Fingernails tapping a wooden surface. Glass clinking glass. Rustling. One particular sound was quite unnerving. Squelching. Footsteps in the muck of our rain-soaked garden. I ran to my bedroom window, looked outside, and saw nothing. But the foreboding footsteps persisted. The doctor had warned that things would sound tinny, but that wasn't what I was experiencing. My family and friends had all sounded robotic as they spoke, The voice in the car and the footsteps in the mud, however, had a distinctness to them, more intimate than any sound I'd ever heard before losing my hearing. At that moment, I recalled my walk through the hospital. Every noise, whether it had been my mother's voice or clacking computer keys, sounded slightly muffled and distorted. That was to be expected. And yet, a silky smooth voice had been buried somewhere in the mix. I just hadn't been able to distinguish the words over the racket. And then I said there was all... Yeah, no, it's all... In the doorway. I sat upright in my bed and listened to the paced, purposeful footsteps. I did consider that a noisy neighbour might be strolling through their own squelching garden. I considered that I might have gained superhuman hearing, but that didn't quell the fear in my heart. Eventually, the footsteps ceased, and I lay down, tucking myself beneath the duvet and closing my eyes. In the doorway. My toes curled until the nails had burrowed into my bedsheets. It was the whispery voice that I had heard in the car. It sounded as if it had been whispered directly into my ear. My eyelids flew open, and I sprang to a sitting position. There was nobody in the room, but I know what I heard. It wasn't an implant glitch. It wasn't the radio. It was a real voice. I started to hyperventilate, my skin itching under the weight of the invisible eyes that watched me. To an outside observer, all of this might be easily explainable, but I know what I heard, and I know what I felt. There was a real and present danger in that room. I didn't get any sleep. I sat in the dark for hours, eyeballing my bedroom wall. When I finally heard my sister saunter across the landing to get ready for work, I exhaled. I was still quivering, but at least I wasn't alone. She knocked on the door and entered without waiting for a reply. "How'd you sleep, idiot?" she asked. "Any problems with the implant?" Heart still racing, I feigned a smile and shook my head. No, I'm fine. I heard your deep masculine snores from the other end of the landing. It's working perfectly." Beth smiled and leant calmly against the doorframe. "Jokes aside, I missed our dumb chats. It's good to be able to talk to you again, Ben." I grinned, rubbing the sleep out of my eyes, and I looked up to reply to my sister. To my horror, I found myself looking at a hand on Beth's shoulder. A decaying, near fleshless hand. Seemingly detached from any visible body, it tightly clenched my sister. "You all right, little man?" she asked, wincing and clutching her shoulder. "You look a little pale. Maybe you..." Before my sister could say another word, the frightful fingers tightly clawed into her body and tugged. Beth was torn backwards, fired by a phantom force into the banister. She tumbled over the edge. I screamed and ran out of my room, only to find myself standing at the top of the stairs, faced with a sight I cannot scrub from my memory. My sister's body lay crumpled and disfigured at the foot of the staircase. My parents quickly emerged, screeching incoherently for help. As I stood there, transfixed by the horror of unfolding events, I felt something haunting, a hand on my own shoulder. Words tentatively trickled into my ear. "It's not polite to eavesdrop, Benjamin." Every night, my dad made us lock our bedroom doors. When we were children, my siblings and I followed a strict rule. We weren't, under any circumstances, permitted to open our bedroom doors between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. "Do you want a bedtime story, sweetie?" my father asked. His sickly sweet voice, worming through the keyhole of my bedroom door, was gravelly and warm. But it wasn't my father. And I don't mean someone else. It was something else. Dad never explained why we had to lock our bedroom doors every night, but we knew something was wrong with the man in the hallway. He became a terrifying thing in those torturous twilight hours. Some nights, our father let us sleep. Most nights, however, he would stand outside our rooms. Father would somberly scratch at the woodwork like a wounded dog, yearning to be let inside. I don't know how we resisted the urge to open our doors for so many years. We were children. How did we know that it wasn't just a game? It might have been something about the tone of Dad's voice. The air always felt sour when he hissed those nightly words of caution. But the man would transform after 10 o'clock. My fawning father uttered hollow platitudes in a bid to appeal to our childlike sensibilities. "You've been such a good girl, Rosa," he once cooed from the other side of the door. "Why don't you come out and have a slice of cake? Our little secret." After an hour of unsuccessful badgering, I heard his nimble feet shuffle near soundlessly across the carpet. He begged my older sister, Lottie, to open up. Then, finally, he would beg Alden, his eldest child. Dad always seemed to rat on my brother's door handle the most insistently. It wasn't until the spring of 2014, when I was 9 years old, that my father's safeguard crumbled to pieces. On a dreadful night that I have tried to forget, a commotion woke me, but it wasn't my father. "Help!" Alden screamed in a muffled voice from his room down the hall. "Let me out!" I rose from bed and walked to my door, listening to the cries of my terrified brother. I could hear shuffling sounds in my sister's room across the hallway. "Rosa?" Lottie whispered, muffled by our 2 doors. "Are you awake?" "Yeah," I answered. "What's wrong with Alden?" "I don't know," Lottie said, and she cleared her throat to project her voice. "Alden? What's wrong?" "I need help!" he screeched. She whimpered. Is it Dad? Did you open the door for him?" "No, of course not," Alden scoffed. I can't breathe. I need to go to the hospital." "Oh no," Lottie whispered. "We need to check that he's okay," I replied. "No," Lottie barked. "You know the rules, Rosa. We can't open our doors until 6. We have to wait for another 4 hours. "I can't hear Dad on the landing," I pointed out. "I'm quick, Lottie. I think I could make it to Alden's room without being caught." I could hear my heartbeat in my eardrums. The thrumming sound swelled in my shivering head. striving to ward off foolish thoughts. No use. I'd already placed one palm on the door handle, whilst using the other to twist the lock open. It clicked. "Don't do it," Lottie pleaded. "Don't make me come out there with you. I will." "Sorry, Lottie," I said. "It's not a game, Rosa," my sister wailed. "Something's wrong with Dad. That thing we hear outside our doors. It isn't him." I eyeballed the door handle for 10 endless seconds, carefully considering my sister's words. She was right. Whenever my dad spoke from the corridor, my hairs stood on end. It was as if a primal sense within me could detect an unholy abomination on either side of the door. I knew it wasn't a game, even at the age of 9. But I couldn't bear to sit in my room whilst Alden screamed. I delicately eased my door open, terrified that I would see my father's eyes peering through the gap. Or worse, something else. But I didn't, and I breathed a sigh of relief before stepping into the hallway. "Rosa, just wait. Something's bothering me," Lottie said. I crept towards Alden's room as quietly as possible, but I froze when I noticed that its door was wide open, and he was nowhere to be seen. I turned around to head back to my room. "He can unlock his own door," Lottie pointed out. "Why does he need us to?" I yelled until my lungs neared bursting, and Lottie trailed off. I'd found Alden. He was standing at the other end of the corridor, lurking in the darkness. Well, something stood there. It wore Alden's clothes, but it wasn't him. With a mannequin head that had Alden's vague features, though its eyes were black husks, the entity looked at me. It wore an unmoving smile, etched into its plastic face, that filled me with breathless horror. And then the false Alden spoke in a garbled voice.
"What's happening?"
It was his horrible plastic mouth that had muffled his earlier screams, not the 2 doors between us. "Help!" He giggled playfully. "I need sustenance." The horrifying thing, barely visible on the dimly moonlit landing, snapped its plastic limbs into action and began to crawl up the walls. Coming to a stop on the ceiling. It clung to the plasterwork like a sinister spider, eyeing me from an upside-down position. At that moment, I heard Lottie's lock clicking, and her door opened inwards. She sprinted into the corridor with the cricket bat and swung at Alden, catching his chin and sending him sprawling onto the carpet. "Hiss!" He hissed and prepared to pounce at my sister, but a sudden voice stopped him. It came from the darkness, accompanied by clomping footsteps. "Happy birthday, my son," my father whispered, stroking Alden's hair. "Don't be afraid, girls. Alden has been given
The gift.
It's in our blood. Your time would have come too." Dad stepped into the sparse light, and I saw that he looked just like Alden. Worse, perhaps. His plastic mannequin face looked tarnished by time, smeared with bloodstains, chipped and cracked. "If only you'd kept your doors locked, my delicious daughters," he snarled. Lottie turned, with tears in her eyes, obstructing our father from reaching me.
She clutched the cricket bat with her trembling hands. "See the window behind you?" she asked me. I turned to face the glass pane at the end of the landing. We lived in a bungalow, so I knew I could escape directly onto our driveway, but I wasn't looking at the outside world. As I ran to the window, I watched my sister's reflection in the glass pane. She valiantly defended herself against our father, but the monstrous man snapped her weapon like a twig, before wrapping his plastic arms around her. I cried, fumbling with the latch for the window. My father, with arms like boa constrictors, liquefied my sister. He turned her into plastic sustenance. Lottie unleashed a deafening scream as her body bloodily detonated, drenching my father's face and the walls. The haunting ghoul hissed at me as I clumsily clambered out of the window, tasting freedom. I don't know why he didn't pursue me, but I ran straight into town, stumbling into the local police station. Dad and Alden were never found, but the remnants of my sister served as evidence of my story. I've spent the last 9 years reliving that ghastly night. You probably know why I suddenly felt the urge to tell the tale of my family's horrible secret. Tomorrow is my 18th birthday.
My son makes terrible things happen when he says, "I spy." Liam was always a hollow child, but I compensated for his callousness with my boundless love. And I still love him. That might horrify you after learning what he did. A mother cannot wrestle with her biological predispositions, though I have longed to do so. If you have a warm, empathetic child, then I suppose you might not understand. That would be a good thing. I don't want to believe in the existence of others with Liam's perturbing power. "I spy with my little eye," Liam began, "something beginning with F." "Falafel?" my husband David eagerly asked. "Huh?" my 6-year-old son blankly responded. "Ignore your father," I groaned. "He's just hungry." "Fire?" Alicia teased. Liam walloped his older sister on the upper arm, briefly furrowing his sturdy brow. He quickly composed himself, but I saw that fleeting flicker of humanity. Fear was the only emotion my son ever seemed to possess, and only the mention of fire could elicit that response. "Alicia," I scowled, "what have I told you about scaring your brother?" "He scares me constantly," Alicia huffed. "Well, you're nearly a grown-up, so I expect you to be the mature one," I sighed. "What about field?" Liam shook his head and smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was not a human smile. It bubbled with boiling brutality, like a poison-laced broth. His pause filled me with terror. "Fox," he whispered. David scoffed. "Fox? Where did you see—" My husband slammed the sole of his boot onto the brake pedal before he finished the question. The rubber of the Range Rover's tyres scorched against tarmac, and the bulky vehicle drew to an emergency halt. A fiendishly fast blur of red materialised on the road before us, and we found ourselves eyeing a fox. That ordeal occurred a year ago. We often talked about the unsettling nature of the coincidence. How had Liam known the fox would be in the road at that exact moment? Had he seen one a few minutes earlier? David chalked up the close call to calamitous chance. But my maternal instinct told me otherwise. Something had always been deeply wrong with Liam. And 2 days ago, My dreadful suspicions were finally confirmed. We were on a family road trip to the Lake District. At the midpoint of a ceaseless country road, my son made a request that chilled the blood in my veins. "I want to play I Spy," Liam said. David laughed. "We've not played that since the time you almost caused a car accident." "Please," Liam pleaded. "I spy with my little eye something beginning with M." "Mud?" Alicia sighed. In the reflection of my wing mirror, I noticed my daughter staring dejectedly at the passing countryside. Murky farmland stretched to the horizon. Busy beads of rain trickled down the glass panes of the Range Rover, cascading towards the metal bodywork. The weather seemed to be worsening with every passing minute. "Magnificent holiday," David chortled. Liam shook his head, and he smiled menacingly at me. "Any guesses, Mum?" I gulped, fearful of my own son. Main Road?" Liam sighed, faux exasperated. "No. Shall I tell you?" "If it would put an end to your dumb game," Alicia said. The air in the car thickened. It became a foreboding fog that only I seemed to perceive. Call it what you will, a mother's intuition perhaps. I saw a ghastly glint of glee in Liam's eyes. Raw power that shone far more brightly than a year prior. I trembled as my son finally uttered the answer. "Maze." There is no rational explanation for the following events. The sun glared through the windscreen, bathing the world in blinding light. A second later, it cleared, revealing a sudden end to the road. Everyone but Liam screamed as David slammed on the brakes, bringing us to a halt about 3 feet before the abrupt termination point of the road. When I looked in the wing mirror, the road also came to a dead end about 20 feet behind us. Horrifyingly, our tiny stretch of road was encompassed by a 10-foot-tall tower of maize, corn crops, in all directions. "A maze of maize," Liam giggled. Our son opened his door and leapt from the car. He disappeared into a narrow passageway through the slender, towering strands of corn. I shot a pale, petrified look at my husband. His expression mirrored mine. "Did I veer off the road?" David asked. "How did this crop field appear?" Alicia quivered. "There was nothing alongside us but muddy fields, and now we're surrounded by freakishly tall crops." "Clarissa, wait for—" David started, but I had already thrown my car door open, and I started to shout for Liam to come back. I watched my son disappear farther into the maze, and turned to face my husband. "Why are you still sitting there? Come on," I implored. Exiting the car in a mad rush, I frantically dived into the maze to pursue my son. I knew exactly why David and Alicia were frozen in the car. They were still trying to process the supernatural phenomenon they'd witnessed. But I'd assumed something sinister about my son long ago. I was only focusing on finding him. There was no time to waste. I wish, more than anything, that I'd waited for the rest of my family to catch up. I wish we'd banded together in that cage of corn. "Liam!" I heard David call from ahead. How is he already in front of me? I wondered. The dimensions of space and time seemed a little muddy and misshapen in the maze field. We were in Liam's world. Then again, we always had been. And that fact became abundantly clear when I heard my husband's cry for help. I emerged into a clearing to find Liam staring silently at his father. David hung on a wooden cross with his bloody limbs constricted by rope. "Liam!" I screamed. "Let him down!" My son's smile was beyond cruel. Cruelty is a human construct, and my son is not human. It was an insidious grin from the bowels of hell. "You made it to the end of the maze, Mum. Well done. Now let's play I Spy with my little eye, Liam began. Don't, I whispered. Something beginning with I, he finished. I don't want to play, Liam, I sobbed. Please let Daddy down. I'm not mad, I just... Guess! Liam growled. Synchronizing with his guttural outburst, the rain clouds turned black, and thunder rumbled. I suddenly realised that the worsening weather during the car journey must have been caused by my unholy son. I whimpered tearfully. Insects? Liam smiled. No, Mummy. Insides. The scene that unfolded before me was unthinkably terrible. It has plagued me for the past few days, and I have no doubt that it will plague me for the rest of my days. David started coughing. Crimson specks spluttered from his parted lips. The following sound, like a hefty wad of paper being torn in two, was almost as terrifying as the piercing screams that escaped David's throat. It was the sound of his flesh peeling backwards, as if he were being unwrapped. Red meat was slowly uncovered. I could only watch in helpless horror as the man I loved was turned inside out. Organs started to spool from his mouth, and the life drained from his eyes, which were starting to fill with blood. It was a brief spectacle, but one that plays endlessly in my mind. And when it was all over, Liam silently surveyed me. He was hoping for a specific reaction, I think. My sinister son was about to say something, when a noise interrupted his thought. An engine. The Range Rover. Shredding through the edge of the maize field was a blazing box on wheels. My daughter was not in the driver's seat, thankfully. The empty vehicle, propelled by a weighty handbag on the accelerator pedal, as I would later discover, ploughed into the clearing. Liam screeched as it barreled towards him. In a burst of flame, the cross carrying David's corpse collapsed. The smell of burning flesh, wood, corn and diesel filled the air. Following a dazzling spark of sunlight, the real world and its earthly surroundings returned. All that remained of Liam's nightmarish maze trap was the carcass of our car, and Alicia, standing on the roadside in floods of tears. I embraced my daughter, and we mourned the loss of our family. We were picked up by a concerned passerby and driven to the nearest police station. There was no sign of anything that my daughter and I had seen. No maize field, no cross, no fire, no David, and no Liam. My husband and son are officially listed as missing persons. Alicia and I have been bouncing from hotel to hotel, hitching rides and sleeping when we dare to do so. Liam is still out there, and I know it might sound strange to all of you, but I really do hope he is found somewhere safe. He's still my son, after all. Yes, I have to protect Alicia. I know that. I won't let him hurt her. I just pray that my son isn't playing I Spy with any other unfortunate souls.